The twin suns burned high above the desert sky as Cade trudged through the sand, his cloak weighed down by dust and sweat. He had no direction, no purpose, only survival mattered now. The world had changed after the collapse of the outer colonies, and humans had become the hunted instead of the feared. He kept his eyes on the ground, hoping to avoid the patrols of alien scouts that roamed this region. The sand dunes stretched far beyond the horizon, hiding ancient secrets and deadly threats. Every step Cade took echoed with the sound of silence that didn't belong. He had once served in a minor human resistance, a forgotten outpost of rebels who believed they could restore Earth's lost glory. But that hope had died when the last human beacon went dark. Now all he had left was a rusty survival blade and the echoes of old war songs he no longer dared to sing. On the third day without water, he stumbled upon something buried in the sand. His foot hit metal, and he fell to his knees. Brushing the sand away, his fingers found the hilt of a sword, unlike any he had seen before. It was long, ancient, covered in strange glowing runes, and yet it felt familiar. Cade hesitated. He knew better than to touch ancient relics. Some were cursed, others trapped, and most were watched by alien warlords who hunted scavengers. But something inside him whispered that this blade was different, that it was calling to him. He gripped the handle, and the ground pulsed beneath him. The sand trembled as if something massive had awakened. The moment he pulled the sword free, a strange symbol burned into the air, visible only for a second. Then came the sound, a distant horn, carried by the wind. The dunes shifted. Figures began to rise in the distance, tall, armored, blue-skinned aliens with golden eyes. Their leader stood at the center, holding a staff carved with symbols of old empires. They didn't attack. They knelt. Cade's heart raced. None of this made sense. Why would they kneel? Why weren't they attacking? The aliens didn't speak. They just stared at the sword, then at him. One by one, they placed their fists over their hearts, saluting like ancient soldiers. Before Cade could ask why, a booming voice echoed from a hidden speaker beneath the sand. "The Emperor has returned," it said in a language he barely remembered from old rebellion archives. "Long live the bloodline of the Star Throne." Cade's legs felt weak. He didn't know these people. He didn't know this sword. But somewhere deep inside, he felt something awaken. A part of him he never understood. A memory not his own. Something had changed the moment he gripped that weapon, and now, standing among alien warriors who claimed him as their emperor, he realized his war had just begun. The air shifted around Cade as the aliens remained kneeling before him. The silence felt heavy, not empty. Their golden eyes waited for something, maybe a command or a sign. But Cade didn't know what to say. He still held the ancient sword, its metal cold and alive in his hand. The glow along its edge pulsed with a quiet light. It felt like it was watching with him, waiting with him, breathing with him. And it weighed more than it should. The leader of the group stood slowly. His armor was marked with battle scars, and a crest of feathers rested on his armor. Shoulder. He stepped forward and bowed low before Cade, then spoke with careful words. "You have returned," the alien said. His voice was deep, each word sharp and clear. "We feared the bloodline was lost. But the sword has chosen. You are the rightful heir of the Star Throne." Cade shook his head. "You've made a mistake. I'm no one. I was just passing through. I don't know what this sword is or who you think I am." The alien didn't argue. He only stepped back and pointed toward the horizon. There, half buried in the sand, was a ruined structure, tall, broken, and ancient. Its shape was worn by storms, but its golden roof still glimmered beneath the sun. "That is the Hall of Judgment," the alien sighed. "The place of kings. The sword has not returned there in over 1,000 cycles. If you are false, the hall will reject you. If you are true, it will rise." Cade didn't know whether to laugh or run. None of this made sense. He had no memory of empires or bloodlines. He was just a survivor. A man who'd escaped death more times than he could count. But now he was being treated like royalty. The alien warriors formed a circle around him. Not as prisoners or guards, but like protectors. They moved in silent steps as they began walking toward the ruins. Cade followed, unsure of what else to do. He still held the sword. He still felt the pull. When they reached the hall, Cade saw carvings in the stone human faces. They were cracked and worn, but they were clearly his kind. Some looked noble, some looked cruel, but they all had one thing in common. They were marked by the same symbol as his sword. The leader nodded toward the gate. "Place the blade in the heartstone," he said, "and the truth will be known." Cade stepped forward. The sword seemed to hum in his grip. He found a stone pedestal in the center of the hall, shaped like a flame. It had a perfect slot at the top, waiting for the sword to be returned or claimed. His hands trembled as he lifted the weapon. For a second, he paused. This was insane. If he did this, he might wake something he couldn't control. He might bind himself to a destiny that wasn't his. But he had come this far. With a deep breath, he slid the sword into the pedestal. Nothing happened at first. The silence grew sharp again. Then a low vibration spread through the ground. The sand outside shook. The walls began to glow with golden lines that traced their way up into the ceiling. The ruins shifted. Stones moved. Dust lifted into the air as the ancient structure began to rise from the earth. Cade stared in awe as forgotten machines awakened, gears grinding and lights burning. The hall was alive. The alien warriors knelt again, this time lower, this time with fear. The leader bowed so low his forehead touched the sand. "Long live the Emperor," he said. Cade stood frozen in the center of the storm. He was no king. He was no emperor. And yet, something deep in his blood began to stir. Something older than memory. The sword had chosen. The hall had answered. And the past was no longer dead. The Hall of Judgment stood tall once more, its pillars shining under the sunlight. Dust and sand still clung to its surface, but the glow from the ancient walls pushed the desert back. It looked like a piece of history forced awake after sleeping. For centuries, Cade stepped outside with the sword still in his hand. The aliens followed him silently, their armor catching the golden light. Each step they took was heavy with meaning. They looked at him as if seeing a ghost from legend. "I don't understand," Cade finally said. "What does this sword mean? Why did this place rise because of me?" The leader turned to him and spoke calmly. "The sword only awakens for blood that carries the mark. That mark is in your eyes, your face, and now in your touch. You are not just a man. You are the last thread of a line that was thought to be broken." Cade's thoughts raced. He tried to remember stories from Earth's ancient days, but nothing came to mind. His parents had died young. He had grown up in war, raised by silence and steel. No one ever spoke of empires or thrones. A younger alien warrior approached, holding a strange orb. The orb hovered slightly above his palm and emitted a soft blue glow. "This holds the memory of your bloodline," he said. "It will show you what you were meant to be." Cade hesitated. He didn't trust magic or alien tech, but he was surrounded by answers he didn't have. And this orb was part of the puzzle he was now trapped in. He reached out and touched the glow. The world around him faded. In its place appeared a vision of another time. A great city in the stars, filled with towers and ships, with banners showing the same symbol carved into the sword. At the center was a man who looked like Cade but older. Dressed in golden armor, he stood before thousands of aliens and humans alike, speaking of unity and peace. But then fire filled the sky. Ships burned. The stars turned red. Betrayal came from within. And the Emperor was lost. The throne vanished into the sand, waiting for one who would return. Cade pulled his hand back and gasped. The vision was gone, but the feeling remained. His blood felt hotter. His heart beat louder. He now understood why they called him Emperor. He looked like the man from the vision. "This isn't me," Cade whispered. "I'm not him. I'm not that leader. I'm just trying to survive." The leader nodded. "Maybe you are not him. But the sword believes in who you could become. And the enemies of the old empire have also felt the awakening. They will come." As if summoned by those words, a tremor ran through the sand. The sky darkened slightly, as distant clouds of ash floated in. A scout rushed forward from the hills, his chest marked with wounds. "They found us," he said. The Dustburn marched toward the hall. Cade clenched his fists. He didn't know the Dustburn, but from the fear on the scout's face, he knew they weren't just another army. They were hunters, killers, and now they were coming for him. He looked at the sword again. It no longer seemed like a relic. It was heavy with promise and danger. If the Dustburn came, he could run. But where would he go now? He had awakened something that could not be buried again. "Prepare the defenses," Cade said quietly. "If they want the throne, they'll have to take it from me, the alien." Warriors raised their weapons. They didn't cheer. They simply obeyed, like soldiers ready to die for a cause they had waited generations to serve. As the wind picked up and the sand danced in the air, Cade stood alone at the edge of the hall. The storm was coming, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't just running from it. He was ready to face it. Asterisk, the wind howled across the open desert, carrying with it the scent of metal and ash. Cade stood on the ancient balcony of the hall, eyes fixed on the dark cloud moving toward them. The Dustburn were real, and they were coming fast. Alien warriors scrambled through the lower levels of the hall, preparing defenses. They brought out shields, charged energy weapons, and lit the fire pits that lined the broken walls. Old machines sparked to life again, guided by hands that remembered their purpose. Cade paced slowly, sword in hand. He still didn't feel like a leader. The others looked to him with faith, but he looked into himself and only saw fear. He had fought in wars before, but never led one. Never defended a throne made of myths. The alien commander stepped beside him. "We have 70 warriors who still breathe," he said. "The Dustburn have more than 300. But they will not have this hall while a single one of us stands." Cade looked at him. "What are the Dustburn exactly? Why do they want this place?" "They were once part of the Empire," the commander replied. "But they turned to shadow. They betrayed the throne and tried to burn the stars. When the Emperor fell, they vanished. Now they returned to finish what they started." A distant hum began to rise. It sounded like thunder, but it had a sharpness to it, as if machines screamed behind the dunes. Cade tightened his grip on the sword. His breath slowed. His focus sharpened. Whatever was coming, he would not face it unprepared. Below the hall, arches with plasma bows lined the ramparts. Turrets were mounted on old towers that had not fired in 1,000 years. And in the center, at the gates, stood a massive shield. Generator humming with fresh energy. The first sight of the Dustburn army came just before dusk. Dark figures riding sleek machines roared over the sand. Their armor was bone-white, their eyes glowing red. At the front rode a massive brute with black horns and a cape made of torn banners. Cade descended the stairs and stood behind the shield. "Line." The alien troop stepped aside to let him pass. His presence alone gave them courage. They believed the Emperor had returned. Cade didn't argue anymore. He just stood where they needed him. The Dustburn leader raised a long curved weapon and pointed toward the hall. His voice echoed through the air like broken glass. "False king," he shouted. "You hold what is not yours. Surrender the blade or be buried beneath the sands." Cade stepped forward until he stood just behind the shimmering energy field. He raised the sword high so all could see it. The runes glowed as the sun dipped below the dunes. "This blade chose me," he said. "And if you want it, come and take it." The air fell silent. Then the leader gave a signal, and the ground erupted. The dustburn charged like a wave of black fire. The desert trembled beneath them. Cannons roared from the hall, sending bursts of light into the enemy ranks. Arrows streaked across the sky. The battle had begun. Cade joined the front line. His sword moved like it had its own memory, slicing through armor and shadow. Every strike pushed the enemy back. But there were too many. The shield held for now, but cracks had started to form. The alien commander fought beside Cade, blood covering his arm. "They seek the throne, not just your life. If they breach the core, they will erase all memory of what we once were." Cade gritted his teeth. He would not fall here. Not when everything had just begun. He pressed forward, cutting through 3 more attackers before the sand exploded beside him. Smoke filled the air. The hall shook again. But Cade stood firm, his sword glowing brighter than ever. The first night of the siege had begun. The battle lasted deep into the night. Fire lit the dunes like a second sunrise. Screams echoed through the desert as shadows clashed against the glowing stone of the hall. But Cade and his warriors held the line. Bodies lay scattered across the sand, both duskburn and defenders. The once silent walls now echoed with the roar of war. Machines sparked, blades clashed, and blood stained the golden floor. But the ancient gate remained sealed. Cade breathed heavily as he leaned against a broken pillar. His sword dripped with black ichor. His armor was cracked and dented, but he still stood. His arms ached, yet the sword felt lighter with each swing. The alien commander limped toward him, his leg torn and bandaged in cloth. "We cannot hold another wave," he said. "The shield is failing. If they breach the core chamber, all will be lost." Cade looked toward the center of the hall. The Heartstone chamber was sealed by thick stone doors. Behind those walls, the power of the old empire still slept. If the Duskburn reached it, they could destroy what was left of the past. What is inside that chamber? Cade asked. What are they after? Is it more than just the throne? The commander nodded. The Heartstone is more than power. It holds the memory of the empire, a living map of knowledge and history. With it, a leader could restore the old order, or wipe it from existence. Cade felt the weight of the sword shift again. It seemed to respond to the very idea of the Heartstone, as if it had been made to protect it, or to unlock it. The choice now rested with him. We move to the core, Cade said. Seal it from within. If they want it, they'll have to fight us for every step. The remaining soldiers nodded and followed. They were less than 30 now. Tired, wounded, but still standing. Their eyes glowed with the same fierce loyalty. They would not let the past fall again. Cade led them through the ancient halls. The walls were lined with carving scenes of peace, betrayal, and fire, the story of an empire lost, and perhaps now, of one returning. When they reached the chamber, Cade placed the sword into a slot on the gate. The runes pulsed, and the doors slid open. Inside, the Heartstone floated above a golden pedestal, humming with life. It was a crystal, larger than any he had seen. It spun slowly in the air, casting shifting lights across the chamber walls. The air inside was warm and filled with energy that buzzed against his skin. As the others entered, the stone reacted. Images formed in the air, maps, faces, voices of the past. Cade saw the Emperor again. Not a warrior, but a teacher, a builder. Someone who had led not through fear, but with purpose. A deep voice echoed in the room. Only the true blood may command the Heartstone. Only the chosen may restore the path. Cade stepped forward, He didn't speak. He only raised the sword and touched the tip to the stone. The entire room flared with light. For a second, he felt every memory, every moment, flood into him. But only for a second. Then the lights faded. The Heartstone settled, and Cade stood with new clarity. He knew what must be done. He knew why he was here, not by accident, but by blood. The others looked at him, waiting for direction. Before he could speak, the wall behind them shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The final wave had arrived. Cade turned to his warriors. "We hold this chamber," he said. "We protect the stone. Not just for us, but for what comes after." They raised their weapons without a word. They had chosen their emperor. And he had chosen to stand. The last defense of the empire had begun. Asterisk. The first explosion shook the walls of the Heartstone chamber. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the echoes of war roared through the halls. The Duskburn had reached the inner sanctum. Cade stood with the sword glowing in his grip. His soldiers took positions around the crystal, forming a circle of defense. Every face was calm. Every hand was steady. They knew this would be their final stand. The gates at the far end groaned as something massive struck them. Again and again the steel trembled. Behind those doors waited an army of darkness, ready to erase history. Cade looked around at the ancient carvings on the walls. Stories of unity, pain, and sacrifice were etched in gold and stone. The empire had fallen not because it was weak, but because it was betrayed from within. The alien commander came to his side. His face was pale, blood soaking his side, but he still stood proud. The shield is down. This is where it ends. One way or another, Cade nodded slowly. Then we make this room a legend. If we fall with the truth still burning. The doors cracked. A black spike pierced through the metal. Another strike followed. The enemy wasn't just knocking, they were tearing the hall apart. And they would not stop until nothing remained. Cade turned and placed a hand on the Heartstone. A faint light responded to his touch. It surged through the sword, feeding its glow. The blade now burned bright gold, alive with forgotten power. "I'm ready," Cade said. The doors burst inward. Smoke and shadow poured in. The Duskburn stormed through, weapons raised and voices screaming. The defenders didn't wait. They charged to meet them. The clash was like thunder inside the sacred hall. Metal clanged, energy blades lit the room, and screams filled the space. Cade moved through it all, a blur of golden light, the sword carving. Through enemy after enemy, the Heartstone pulsed with each strike. Every time Cade brought down an enemy, the light grew stronger. The ancient power responded to his will, as if recognizing a long-lost command. The alien commander fell beside the pedestal, a spear in his chest. With his last breath, he whispered, "Protect the stone. Reclaim the stars." Cade's eyes burned with fury. He stepped over the fallen and drove forward. The Duskburn were relentless, but so was he. His soldiers followed without question. They fought not for survival, but for meaning. One of the Duskburn leaders reached the Heartstone. His hand touched the crystal, and it flashed red. The stone rejected him violently, throwing him across the chamber. Cade stood over the fallen enemy and ended him with one strike. The tide began to shift. The defenders pushed harder. The Duskburn screamed in frustration. Their numbers began to fall. For the first time they hesitated. Cade raised the sword high. The hall stands. The truth lives. This empire will not die in the dark. His voice cut through the chaos. His people responded with renewed strength. The chamber burned with golden fire as the last wave was pushed back. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. The last of the Duskburn fell at the gates. Silence returned. Only the sound of heavy breathing and dripping blood remained. Cade dropped to one knee. The sword dimmed slightly, now calm. Around him, only 12 of his warriors still stood. The rest lay in honor across the floor. He looked at the Heartstone. It hovered calmly, untouched. Safe, alive, the Empire was not yet reborn, but it had survived one more night. The chamber remained quiet as the last echoes of battle faded into the stone walls. The golden glow from the Heartstone bathed the blood-soaked floor, casting long shadows that moved slowly with the flickering light. Cade stood in the center, his sword resting against the ground. His shoulders were heavy with loss, and his eyes scanned the faces of the few who still breathed. The survivors looked worn, but proud. They had defended the Empire's last breath. Outside the hall, the desert was silent. The dustburn had vanished into the dunes, broken and scattered. But victory had come at a high cost. Over 60 defenders had fallen, and the ancient structure bore the scars of war. Cade walked slowly to the alien commander's body. He knelt beside him and placed a hand over his chest. "You held the line," he said quietly. "Your name will be carved in fire and stone." The others gathered near. No one spoke. There were no songs or prayers, only the stillness of sacrifice, and the presence of something greater than words. The hall had witnessed their courage. The Heartstone had accepted their blood. A soft hum broke the silence. The Heartstone pulsed again, but this time in a steady rhythm. The sword in Cade's hand shimmered as if responding to a call. He turned to face the crystal. One of the elders among the warriors stepped forward. He held a staff marked with the symbol of the Star Throne. "The Heartstone waits," he said. "It is time for the trial." Cade frowned. "What trial? Haven't I already proven myself?" The elder shook his head. "This was only the beginning. The sword chose you, and the hall accepted you. But the Heartstone holds the final voice. You must enter the chamber of memory. Only then can the Empire rise again." At the back of the room, a second door slowly opened. A narrow hallway of light revealed itself, leading deep underground. No one had noticed it before. It had waited for this moment. It had waited for him. Cade stepped forward without hesitation. The sword glowed softly, lighting his way. He walked alone down the passage, the walls lined with strange writings that shifted as he passed. Each step echoed louder than the last. The hallway opened into a circular chamber filled with floating orbs. Each orb held a memory and event, a decision, a truth from the past. At the center stood a pedestal, waiting for his touch. Cade placed the sword across the pedestal. The room darkened. Then a voice, calm and ancient, filled the space. "Who are you?" He took a deep breath. "I'm Cade. I don't come from royalty. I don't know the old ways, but I bled for this place. I chose to stay. I chose to fight. If that's not enough, then I was never meant to be emperor." The orbs glowed brighter. Images of the fallen emperor appeared. His rise, his fall, his hopes for unity. Then came flashes of Cade, his battles, his choices, his defiance. The chamber seemed to weigh each moment. Silence returned. Then the voice spoke again. "You are not him, but you are worthy. The throne will rise, not because of blood, but because of choice." The sword floated back into his hands, blazing with new light. The chamber opened, and Cade stepped out. His soldiers looked up and saw the glow. They fell to one knee without a word. The trial was over. He was now more than a symbol. He was the Emperor. Asterisk, the Hall of Judgment stood calm under the light of the rising twin suns. The sky was painted in shades of orange and blue as warmth returned to the desert. No enemy approached. No shadows crept across the sand. For the first time in centuries, the silence meant peace. Cade stepped onto the highest balcony of the hall. The sword rested on his back, now sheathed in a new scabbard made from ancient metals and wrapped in ceremonial cloth. Below him stood the 12 warriors who had survived the siege. They waited in quiet formation, heads bowed in respect. They were no longer just soldiers. They were the first protectors of a new beginning. Each bore marks of battle and loyalty. Their wounds were still healing, but their spirits burned brighter than ever. The Heartstone Chamber remained sealed. It had granted Cade its approval, but now it rested again, waiting for the future. Its energy still pulsed beneath the hall, a heartbeat of memory and power. Cade raised his hand, and the warriors lifted their heads. "You stood when others fled," he said. "You believed when others doubted. You have given me more than loyalty. You have given this throne a reason to exist." They placed their fists to their chests and bowed. It was not a gesture of submission, but one of trust. They had chosen him, not because he was born for it, but because he had proven he was worthy of it. News of the Dustborn's defeat spread quickly across the outer colonies. Signals were sent from the hall, reaching hidden stations and distant satellites. The message was simple but powerful. The throne lives. Cade watched the old communications tower spark back to life. Its rusted frame had been repaired overnight by the engineers among the warriors. Now it reached toward the stars, calling allies who had long given up hope. By nightfall, responses began to return. Messages filled with broken voices and blurry faces. Some were human, some alien. All shared one thing: a spark, a question, a longing for what had been lost. The throne was more than a chair, more than a sword or a symbol. It was a promise. A connection between countless worlds that had once stood as one. Now it was being rebuilt by hands that had nearly forgotten how to hope. Cade walked through the hall as workers repaired the broken stone. He greeted each by name, asking of their wounds and their families. They no longer called him just Emperor. They called him Cad. He liked that. In a quiet room near the western wing, he found the journal of the last emperor. It had been hidden beneath stone, untouched by time. Its pages were filled with notes, sketches, and dreams of unity. Cad. Read them carefully. He saw not power, but purpose. He added a single line at the end of the final page. The empire fell by betrayal. It will rise by choice. Later, as the stars filled the sky and the fires of the hall glowed warm in the dark, Cade stood beside the ancient throne. It had been repaired, but he did not sit. He placed the sword across it and stepped back. The throne would not rule the people. The people would guide the throne. Behind him, the 12 warriors stood guard, watching the stars with silent pride. Around them, the hall pulsed with life. Machines hummed, lights danced. The future waited to be written. Cade smiled softly and turned his eyes to the horizon. The Emperor had returned. But this time, he had come not to rule, but to lead.